Welcome back to Season 2 of Illuminating Leadership. This season, we'll explore how leaders and employees can best navigate the new workplace, with specific emphasis on how culture impacts engagement. I'm your host and leadership development coach, Beth Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here. If you like what you hear today, head over to patreon.com at Illuminating Leadership. Remember, that's Lumen with an E. And subscribe for exclusive coaching benefits and rewards that you won't find on my other platforms. Things like live Q&As, ad-free content. Hey, you guys, welcome back to Illuminating Leadership. I am so pleased to be here tonight with our guest, Zachery Peterson, a registered nurse and a veteran of the United States Army. Zachery, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. I am thrilled that you're here. For our listeners, I was so intrigued when I met Zachery actually through my doctor's office, and we both started talking about something related to the military. He made a comment and I thought, I want to get to know this young man a little bit more. And the more we spoke, the more I realized you're going to want to hear what he has to say. So to just kick us off tonight, Zachery, tell us a little bit, give me a kind of a brief description of how you entered the military, kind of what your responsibilities were, and what brought you into civilian life.
So, really what brought me into the military was that I made the fourth generation of my family to serve. My great-great-grandpa was a combat medic in Korea. My grandpa flew medevac in Vietnam, and then my dad was airborne infantry. And I always looked up to my dad. My dad was my hero growing up, and I wanted to be like him. And honestly, even in my early 20s, that's what inspired me to join, was like, I wanted to be a soldier like my dad was a soldier. And so then I went through my military career, and it was actually when my son was conceived, right before I was deployed to Iraq, that I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's just, the military is not kid friendly. They're not family friendly, period. They really don't accommodate for that. People would think that it is that way, but I mean, especially in my situation where there was some custody issues, if I got deployed during that period where it was still in litigation, I could lose my son for abandonment because I was on deployment. I know people that's happened to, because they said, well, you were gone for a year, So that's what led me to go, that and the overwhelming negative experience I had in the military. As soon as my contract came up, I was done. I didn't want to do it anymore.
Okay, that really catches me off guard because I am your typical, I understand the military through what I see on television and then what I hear kind of in the periphery from people, right? And I know this is going to sound really, weird to you and maybe our listeners, but think about the show Army Wives back in, 10 years or so ago. That show really portrayed the military as family friendly, extremely family friendly and kid friendly. So tell me what I'm missing. What was your experience? What happened?
So, I mean, they tried to, on bases, accommodate certain things. And that's great. I'm sure that the United States government would not really love a show that portrays the military in a bad way, especially when recruiting right now is, almost at an all-time low. This generation doesn't want to serve, and for good reason. And so, especially coming from my perspective, where I was in the reserves, it's that any time you spend in the military is time taken away from your family, and they don't compensate you for that in a fair manner. Almost everyone that I deployed with was either absolutely single or had a family to support. And on both sides of the fence, they all lost money going on deployments because you get paid so little. It's essentially, you're working 24 hours a day, and you're getting paid what somebody working 40 hours a week at a $15 an hour job gets. And, so from the perspective of trying to support a family, absolutely not. These days, you can't. The average American makes $35,000 a year, and then you can actually look online and see the pay scale for each grade, and they don't make anything. How are you supposed to support a family on that? Going back over to the nursing side, a lot of nurses who quit being a nurse because it's too expensive to have childcare and have them work, even when they're making $36 an hour.
Okay, so you shared a lot with both nursing and military, and I'll come back to the nursing in a second. You said you really looked up to your dad and, wanted to emulate his experience and go be a soldier and serve your country like he did. Have you all talked about the disparities or the differences between your experience and his experience?
My dad suffered from pretty severe and complex PTSD from his time in the military. So actually, when I told him that I had joined, he was furious. My dad did commit suicide 2 years ago, and a huge uh, portion of that is that he was trying to deal with a lot of his trauma, and he was an alcoholic, and so he was white knuckling it his whole life with self-treating with alcohol. And then when it came time for him to, at 55 years old, he decided he wanted to deal with it, but he didn't know how to reach out for help. That's a separate crisis, mental health crisis, and men, that's a separate thing. But so it got too much for him.
Zachary, first of all, I'm sorry, I did not know that that had happened for and with your father. And I absolutely believe there is a mental health crisis, especially for our men and for our military. And I'm actually vacationing right now with someone from the military who had a totally different experience. And we were just discussing that last night as to, what and again, he's my age, so he started back in the 80s, I guess, and found facilities and services to be available. So he and I started to debate that because that's not quite what I hear from your generation, right?
Yeah.
And
So, yeah. But to speak to that effect, all the veterans, all the older soldiers that I have met who have been in 25 years, they consistently will say, I would go back today and join that military, that army, but I would not join this one. And the only reason a lot of those older soldiers are staying in is because they changed a lot of the regulations so that you can't pass certain benefits down to your children unless you're in for so long. So you can't change who the beneficiary is unless you stay in for another couple of years.
okay,
So for a lot of them, that hit, and then they were like, well, I stayed in so my kids could go to college or they could have these healthcare benefits. A lot of people, especially in the National Guard and Army Reserve, the huge draw and the retention that they get is TRICARE because it's great. It really
right.
is.
So from a leadership standpoint, what did you run into that you were surprised by or that you think some of our listeners would be surprised by today?
It's the vast majority of people that are in what I would label as direct leadership positions, the ones that are like your middle managers, your non-commissioned officers, the ones that are actually on a day-to-day basis interacting with the troops and directing them, and they're there with them. Um, they're vastly unqualified to hold the positions that they do have. They don't take that role of leadership seriously. A lot of them, especially people that have been in combat arms, a lot of them will use their position of authority to abuse the people under them. In my time in Iraq, we would see that. We would see that. I was out there doing technical engineering. Basically, I actually don't know how much of that I can talk about, but in the course of my duties, I was with another soldier and we were doing what we were needing to do.
Mhm.
And we look over and we just see, the airborne guys just getting trashed by their NCOs. And then when we go back to base and we have to go through a series of checks to get off base, security checks, because a lot of American bases have more than one nation there.
Right.
We're considered basically the host nation, and then there's other ones that are working in collaboration, and each one has their own security force. So you got to clear it with everybody before you leave. And we'd go in there and they'd have all the lower enlisted crammed into a back room and they'd be in the hallway playing cornhole. And there's a few soldiers. I would say the best NCO I ever met was my head drill sergeant, my head drill instructor. And he was what we call high speed. in the Army. And he was acting as the executive officer as well as fulfilling his own position. And he had made it from E1 to E7 in a very short time. And he was planning on going to officer school. He was there. He was motivating. He was physically and mentally present. He took individual care of his soldiers. He understood the disparity between what was and what is and actively tried to amend that. Drill Sergeant Mathis, I'll never forget him.
From what you had said before and even listening to this, there are more parallels now to corporate leadership than I ever believed, right? Big shout out to him, because we're finding it more difficult to locate that leader who does all of these things. I wrote it down. Motivated, was present physically and mentally, provided individual care, and recognized the disparity. So I want to dig into each one of those a little bit. Motivating, we get, I think. Sure. Present physically and mentally. Why were both important, and why are both important in a leadership role, in corporate America?
So I've had various leadership positions, and the one that I can most assimilate to his experience as a drill sergeant is being a dorm father. And what a dorm father is at a boarding school, you live with the boys, you have a separate room off the dormitory, you're there with them, you get them up, you get them going, you get them to school. When they're in school, they're not your responsibility, but after that, they are. You make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. And through that experience, I realized that if you're not physically present with them, if you are not doing the things with them, you will lose a vast amount of respect, because out of sight is out of mind. And the things that are familiar to us are the things that are comfortable to us, the things that we trust. You're not going to trust somebody if you only see them once in a while and those interactions are negative. Yep. So it's really important to be physically present with, and that goes across any job. If I only see you when there's a problem, I'm conditioned to have a negative response to you.
Exactly.
And then the mental portion of it is that it doesn't do any good if you're there all the time and you're an asshole, because so many people are unqualified to be in the positions they are. And I would say the biggest thing about that is micromanagement. There's some nurses told me when they had an interim supervisor, she would actually come up behind them when they were working on the computer and watch what they were doing to make sure that they were doing their job the way they were supposed to be doing it, and they weren't going on to Pinterest or something else in their free time and misusing company resources. That's insane to me.
That pisses me off, actually. Yeah. That really, and I 100% agree with you, because I have found that so many leaders that are promoted are not prepared for the soft skill people side of it. We, as a corporate society, and I want you to see if this parallels with militaries, you've got you've got a skill set. You excel at that skill set. There is a need for a leadership role to be filled, and because you excel at the skill set, I'm going to promote you. That does not make you a leader. It is a good start, right? You understand how to do the work that your folks are going to be doing. But if you don't understand how to interact with and inspire and motivate people, as you said, you're not going to build that trust.
So as far as the hard versus the soft skills, that is absolutely how the military works in terms of so in order for somebody to go from enlisted E4 to E5, a non-commissioned officer, on the Reserve and the National Guard side, they have what they call, you have to go through boards, which is just in the active duty side could be just a high-ranking NCO and a couple other ones, and they're sitting down, and you come in your dress blues and everything all done up, and then you have to, you can watch YouTube videos. Sometimes they just mess with them. They just apply pressure to see how they react. I saw a command sergeant major go up, and he just took the chair that they were supposed to sit in, and he turned it on its side. And he went and sat back down just to see how the E4 would react to the chair being like that. So when they come in, they salute and everything, and they go sit down. and just to see if they're going to pick the chair up because they're nervous. How are they going to act under
Mm-hmm.
pressure? So the active duty side has a little bit better because they have that, they want to see in that moment, can you handle pressure? Which is a good idea. But beyond that one stipulation, everything else is hard skills. What's your PT score? Have you gone to the right schools? Do you have all of the quantifiable, calculated qualifications? And in the Reserve and National Guard side, all you have to have is the qualifications. It's called a paper board. So you get all of your qualifications together in a packet and you send it up. And so you do go through an NCO school, which really just teaches you how to execute certain tasks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it really develops leadership. I don't think they focus on how to create an influence on people, because that's a huge part of, I mean, that's in some senses the entirety of leadership is influencing people. So those soft skills are completely neglected, and that's also in nursing. The only reason for anybody to want to go from an associate's degree to a bachelor's as an RN is if they want a leadership position, because you have to have that bachelor's to get that leadership position, or you have to get that master's or that doctorate. That's why we see here in Bismarck, there's just an explosion of nurse practitioners. There's too many of them. They can't get jobs. There's so many of them that they'll graduate, work for a year, 2 years as something else entirely, waiting for a nurse practitioner. And a lot of these people that are doing it are younger women. They're 26 years old. You know, they went and did their nursing degree right away, and they immediately decided, I don't want to stay here. I don't want to do this. And so they're already trying to bump up to that next level. And part of that is, you know, again, the work culture, a lot of it's monetary. You just,
Mm-hmm.
if you went to a decent, in the American context, a decent school, you paid $40,000 a year for a 4-year. That's $120,000 to become a nurse. And if you're only making, you know, when I first came in, and at hospitals around here, they were hiring at $29 an hour, which is good. It's better than the average American, but it's not enough to pay back your loans. So anyway, that's a separate thing entirely. But as far as the hard and soft skills go, I think it's totally lost in every field I've been in, every organization except for one, that soft skills are actually more important than those hard skills, in my opinion. Anybody can get through school. I mean, I've had friends that are dyslexic that are mechanical engineers. Anybody can get through some assignments, writing some papers, doing some homework. That doesn't mean you're qualified in any sense of the word to be in a leadership position. It's who you are as a person. And, you know, that was something else I wanted to touch on that I had seen in some of the, you know, preview interview questions, is how to, like, you know, promote leaders. And it's insane that they're going here and saying, well, on paper, you know, you're the guy. And then in reality, they're not at all. And so I don't think most corporate leaders understand what work culture is. I think they believe it's mostly about putting out memos and putting out mission statements. And it's about trying to sell a face of what they represent to the public and to the authorities and to anybody else that they think will give them money or have them lose money. They try to present this face, but in reality, those values aren't emulated by their business practices whatsoever.
And you're
Yeah.
100% right. John Maxwell, one of the most well-known and internationally renowned leadership experts in the world, had made a statement very similar to that years ago. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. It is not about having the skill set. You can teach somebody skills.
Yeah.
It's much more difficult to teach somebody how not to be an asshole.
Yeah.
Right? So I am actually really surprised to hear some of what you said in nursing. It almost aligns with what I've seen myself. I feel like each hospital or each doctor's office I go to, there is a kind of an abundance of PAs. There are almost more PAs than there are doctors now. And I'm very disappointed to hear that, like teachers, nurses are the people who care for us. Teachers are the people who nurture and teach us and prepare us for the world. And why do we underpay and treat those human beings as less than?
Well, I mean, even if you go and look at the average salaries, because my dream prior to having my son and altering my life drastically was to go back to school and study and become a professor of literature. And the reason I didn't do it is I looked at the salaries. Even if I went to a big name school, I'm looking at only making $50,000 a year. Having to get my doctorate in order to teach there, it's insane. Now, if I was teaching mathematics with the same degree, it's twice the money or more. So even at the collegiate level, we place higher value reflected in a monetary fashion on hard skills than soft skills, because a literature professor is going to teach you how to be human. A mathematics professor is going to teach you how to execute a job function.
Correct. How to be human, how to think critically, how to look at different perspectives, how to understand people around you and nature. I mean, all of these things. I had no idea, because here I am again, average citizen, thinking you're a professor at a college with a doctorate, you're going to be paid similarly. So that's,
And that changes, I'm sure, as the longer
yeah,
you there and stuff. But
sure.
that disparity between, again,
Mm-hmm.
the math and science folks, and then those who are responsible for feeding your soul,
Yeah.
they don't get valued the same.
You know what's ironic? A couple of years ago, I did some studying about, it was based on a Forbes magazine article that said we're replacing the phrase soft skills with power skills. And that's something I don't know if Forbes is, behind. I don't recall what that was, but they were the ones who reported that it is actually the military who developed the quote unquote handbook on what soft skills are, what they look like, and how important they are post World War II. And in the article I read, said that the military placed significant, um, uh, it was trained equal to those hard skills. And that was not your experience.
No, I would say, at least in their educational aspect, when you're in basic combat training or AIT, there is definitely a little bit of that. I would say the military was the only organization, and this was only during my educational phase. It wasn't during the rest of it. But when you're in training and you're in that TRADOC environment, they do emphasize heavily doing the right thing because it's the right thing,
Okay.
not because you're going to get some reward. They teach morals, they teach ethics, and rather than as words in a classroom, they actually, physically force you. They use force to make you adhere to those principles. Whether it be, if you didn't execute self-discipline, you didn't dress correctly, you didn't take time management seriously. Well, if your locker was unlocked, they would take it out and take all of your stuff and throw it everywhere, and then give you 2 minutes to pick it all up. Otherwise, they would smoke you. They call it smoking, physically, training them to exhaustion. And so by doing that, they make people develop certain virtues. But that's only in that environment. I never experienced that in my reservist time. I didn't experience that when I was active duty in Iraq. Those environments were dominated by fear of leadership.
Right.
It was as soon as formation breaks, scatter, because you're going to get basically told to do something that is just a waste of time, essentially. Or, hey, let's go check these vehicles that we check every month that we've never moved, that we don't use, and let's spend 6 hours doing it. Checking the oil, kicking the tires, making sure it runs. What is essentially a 20-minute task, this is what you're going to do for 6 hours.
Wow.
So you hide from them. You find some other way of looking like you're engaged and busy so that you don't get pulled for what's essentially a bullshit duty. Because instead of NCOs going, what's your MOS?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what are you supposed to do and function? And how can I make you better at that? That's the job that they're supposed to do. And that's the job they're not doing.
And what a colossal loss for the individual and for the military. Because if that one leader took the time to do exactly what you said, I think you even said it with your gentleman earlier, individual care, you called it, which, tell me if I've got this right. You're talking about understanding your people, talking to your people, understanding them, getting to know their needs, getting to know what they need to better themselves and what you can do to help them get where they need to go. And that's as true in the military as it is in corporate. Am I wrong?
No, and I would say so like a twofold distinction I'm gonna make here. Like every relationship, whether it be a friendship, whether it be a romantic, whether it be with your children, whether it be with your boss, is based on two things: trust and communication. Those are universals between all relationships.
Yep.
And if you have a spouse you can't trust, or a boss you can't trust, it's the same. If I can't trust my boss, like anybody that's ever been in a dysfunctional marriage, which is a lot of people can identify with that, it's because there was a lack of trust and communication and they were miserable. A bad marriage is easy to spot. It's on the faces of both spouses.
Yep.
And it's the same when you walk into any business today. You can see it on the faces of the employees. They're miserable because they're trapped in basically what is a dysfunctional marriage. They are married to their job. They are
Correct.
bound. They are bound by a contract to cooperate, not to do whatever's told, but to cooperate with their boss to achieve an end. And they have no trust or communication. So beyond that, what really plays specifically into a business, and I speak of both the Army, nursing. I was in gas and oil field as well. All of that is a business. The Army is a business. Absolutely, those parallels exist. But what a leader is supposed to do is look for the potential in each one of their subordinates. Go, what are you capable of doing? And where are you at now? And how do I get you to where you could be? That's their primary role, is to bring out, and people can correct me, I'm wrong in the comments. Aristotle, I believe it was, said that he was a midwife. No, it was Socrates. Socrates said he was a midwife. He didn't give anybody knowledge. He brought it forth because he believed in inert knowledge. But a method of leadership that's much like a midwife in how you interact with your subordinates is that you're helping them to be the best versions of themselves, and not just as such that they execute their job person as a whole person, right, holistically, to look out for them, to take responsibility for them. Responsibility doesn't mean that you're going to answer to your boss for the bottom line. You answer to your subordinates for not giving them the tools and guidance and goals, reasonable goals. That's what you're responsible for. That's not up the chain, it's down. The Pope calls himself the servant of the servants of God. And something I haven't touched on is that I was in a monastery. I was a Benedictine monk for 3 years.
Oh my gosh. We really need to spend a whole lot more time together. You have had a fascinating life.
But just touching very briefly on that is that St. Benedict wrote the rule. And within that, his method of leadership is that you address the needs of each individual as an individual. There is no hard and fast rule that can apply to everyone.
You are spot on communication, whether it is in your personal relationships, in schools, from parents to kids, from boss to subordinates. No one, unless you have had the privilege of having a much higher level education, we don't prepare people on how to work with people. on how to communicate needs and feelings. And, when I was what I always call growing up in corporate, you weren't supposed to. You don't care about the individual. That's why we have handbooks. Handbooks are how we're going to govern the behaviors of the people who work for us because they work for us.
It's the mask of professionalism. We call it professionalism.
Yes, exactly.
You leave you at home.
Right.
When you're here to do a job. I don't care about anything else that's going on in your life. That's
Yep.
you. When you're here, you do your job, and you take your feelings and you put them in a little jar and you put them on a shelf.
Okay, I'm having a little bit of a flashback because I'm watching your mannerisms and the words you said. I have literally had leaders say things like that to me exactly like that when I was starting out. And for any of our listeners, I don't give a shit what generation you are. If you're hearing this and you have ever once thought, that doesn't feel right, that doesn't seem right, it isn't right, you are 100% right, because you cannot turn off the human side of yourself just because you walked in the door of a workplace. And to expect people to do that is
It's inhuman.
It's inhuman. Correct. I love what you said, Zachery, about being responsible for your subordinate, because we are also taught that you're responsible to the ROI and to those above you and to the board of directors. Do you not believe, as I do, which it sounds like you do, when you take full responsibility for your subordinates and you work with you work holistically with each one of them, you won't even have to worry about reporting to your boss on the ROI, because everything then falls in line and takes care of itself. People will trust and follow leaders that they respect and that have been there for them, that treat them like human, and will do the job they're hired to do. 2% of the people are the ones we write the handbooks for. 98% of the people are there to excel. They want to go home at the end of the day feeling good about the job they did, happy because they put in a good day's work, and that they're allowed now to come home to their families and aren't getting phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning to berate them for something, right? Where do you think we went wrong?
I honestly think it goes back a long ways. My understanding, as it's been told to me, I haven't researched the topic personally, is that back in the 60s, instead of having a base salary for your CEOs and your top leaders, which was typically only about 3 times as much as your baseline worker, it went from that to they were tying your wage into your profitability. So instead of having the priority of your customer base and your workforce, it is bottom line. You can't expect to use only 2 ingredients to comprise the whole recipe. You're speaking mostly of how leadership at the executive level is going, what is going on? This is crazy. Why is this happening? Well, you have a workforce that has a completely different standard of what life experience should be. And they're not wrong. They should be treated like people. And they're not treated like people. They're treated like a piece of equipment.
Yeah, I worked recently for a CEO who said just that. Not equipment, but they are numbers. And if they don't do what you want them to do and you've done XYZ, kick them out. We'll get somebody else in here who wants to be here. And I'm thinking, he like other CEOs is highly incentivized on that bottom line. And the more incentivized they are and the more they make, the further apart this gap between executive leadership who set the tone and who create the culture for the company and the people who are the work is being demanded of. What is your definition of a healthy workplace culture?
A healthy workplace culture is one in which the bottom line individual, every level, I'm not going to say the bottom line base worker, it's where everyone within the company, all the way up, feels respected and feels safe. that's a healthy work culture where you don't have people who are afraid of losing their jobs all the time or enduring multiple punitive or humiliating, which is even worse, the amount of humiliation that I've endured, both in the military, which is to be expected on some level, uh, but also in the civilian sector is just, I've got stories of bosses trying to just demean me as a human being in front of my coworkers.
Mhm.
And that's the biggest thing, is that you turn something from correction to public humiliation by not choosing your setting.
Correct.
And so, yeah, you can anticipate I reacted very poorly under those circumstances.
And
Um,
honestly, who can blame you? I mean, let's get
yeah,
right down to it. Again, for my listeners, there are more and more and more people saying, I will react poorly to that because I've seen enough of it. I've experienced enough of it. I watched my parents, I watched whomever be subjected to this kind of inhumane treatment, and no more. We are going to make a change, and it's going to take people reacting and responding and calling out that bad behavior to affect that change.
yeah, and something that just occurred to me that kind of blew my mind, right? Is you have a generation now who there's been an explosion of
Mhm.
information and practices when it comes to self-awareness. And when I say I reacted poorly to it, what I did is I set up a boundary on another person's toxic behavior.
Love it.
And how is that not okay? How can you expect as a business you want to make profit? So what do you want? A motivated workforce? Because how much profitability, how much work can a person get done when they're motivated versus unmotivated? You don't need a study to figure that out. You know that from personal experience. If you're a parent, you've seen it. They'll do what they want to do. They won't. And if you've ever been a teenager in school, you knew you had good teachers and you knew you had bad teachers and you know which ones they were and you know why, because of how they made you feel about yourself. And so that's all it is that you have a generation that comes into a workplace that's toxic, that is negatively influencing them.
Mhm.
And they're going, I have boundaries. You can't speak to me that way. You can't treat me that way. A specific story I have of that is that I got hired into a psychiatry unit at a hospital. I won't say which one and where.
Okay.
And when I started working there, I was assured that I was going to have certain training. And one of those was de-escalation, which is obviously a huge, because most of the people genuinely that come in to a psychiatric unit aren't there by choice. And they're usually, it's drug related and they're in a psychosis, meaning they're not connected with reality. Therefore, they're usually pretty violent. So de-escalation is a pretty necessary thing. And there's other training and stuff that was going on. For instance, there was a student nurse there, and she was afforded the ability to have one mentor the entire time she was there. She only worked the days that her nurse was working, and she only worked with that nurse. I had 7 different nurses during my time in orientation, and some of them had only been there 6 months. Why is this person teaching me anything when they've only been in this unit for 6 months?
Right.
They barely know how their job's going to go. Anyway, long story short, I wrote some very professional emails and said, I have some concerns, on top of which, they were forcing me into night shifts. I said, I will work a third of my total shifts as night shifts to help you out. And I even used those words specifically. I said, I will help you guys out. I know you're hurting for night shift people. I'll work a third of my shifts. I was hired as a day shift person. I said, I'll work a third. And then they started scheduling me 50% of the time and then 60% of the time. I said, listen, 2 things. I had a very professional discussion with you. I established what my expectations were. Those aren't being met. And I'm not getting the training I deserve. And that wasn't responded to. So I wrote another email reiterating that to my bosses. One of my bosses, one of my managers, took me off of my shift, brought me into a conference room, sat me down, looked me in the eye, and told me, you have a lot to learn, and pointed out, you have a lot to learn about the way nursing is. And there's a reason that nursing is toxic the way it is, because so many of the workforce is these girls who have only ever gone to college and only know that artificial environment. And the first thing they get is this ridiculously psychologically and emotionally abusive environment, because it is. I mean, it's necessary because seeing people die is traumatic. It's traumatizing. There's so many things in medicine that are traumatizing.
Right.
It's not normal to witness a person cut open and their bowels displayed. That is on some level traumatizing to people. So I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the inherent stuff. I'm talking about the work culture that's instilled by leadership. You know, you can't have that. And then when you have these people who have no basis of experience to weigh and measure that against, they just go with it because they're like, this is just the way it is. You know, when somebody who doesn't know any better has a person who's much older than them, much more
Yep.
experienced, and has a position of authority tell them, you don't know any better and you need to conform, they just conform.
Listen, my husband and I were just talking about this yesterday, and look back now on our, let's call it now, 35-year career. And we both did the exact same thing in different industries, because you expect that your elders in the workplace have been promoted for a very good reason, that they know how to lead, and that they are going to guide and direct you the right way. And we both have multiple stories where that was just not true. You know, you talked about de-escalation, the art of de-escalation. I thought, my gosh, that is something we could teach in our corporate environments, because conflict management is just lacking altogether. Yeah.
What has honestly helped me the most in dealing mentally and emotionally with all the things that I go through in my work environments is actually my personal relationships. The books that I've had to read and study on mental health and communication, just in my romantic relationships, I've taken those soft skills and I've had to utilize them in the workplace to make it a livable experience.
I would have to say I've done the same, because they, as you say, they are universal and they apply to every relationship, to your boss, to your kids, to your spouse, right? So if
Mhm.
you said earlier, the way I reacted was I set a boundary, and I love that. I wish I had been taught how to do that earlier. So I have worked with leaders that are my age and predominantly male, who say, when you say that to me, Zachery, you're a wuss. You're weak. This generation today, they need their boundaries, and there's mental health and blah blah blah. Now, you and I know what the truth is, but what would you say? What would you say to the leaders who are listening today, who are like, okay, I hear you, Zachery, but I don't quite buy into it yet?
You know, so what you're describing is toxic masculinity.
Mhm.
That's really what that is. And there's a quote I don't know if it's a famous quote, but against truth there is no armor like that of ignorance. And sometimes talking to people that are in that mindset, that are in that perspective, it's like talking to an addict about their behavior and
Right.
trying to get them to see that this is not healthy. And that for a lot of those leaders, they're seeing their business suffer. So I'm going to use the money aspect to try to get through to them. Your money is diminishing and you can see it diminishing, and trying to tell you that the problem is you, that you need to become more self-aware, that you probably need to go to therapy. I mean, how well is that going to get received? Probably not at all. But if I tell you you're going to make more money if you start engaging in this way, that's the bottom line. As a company, you're going to make more money if you engage with a different leadership style than the one you're currently using.
All right, let me ask you this though. Many of them I'm speaking with are in that mid management range. And that mid management range is one of the hardest positions in a company, because you are
Mhm,
responsible to your subordinates and to your superiors and to the board. And
mhm.
so many of them feel stuck saying, okay, my execs are saying, this is how it's going to have to be. So how do you help that, especially that male mid management, go to their superiors and say, we need to change things? If you want to make that money, it's going to start from the top, and I want to be part of it. How do they have that conversation with their superiors?
You know, firstly, they have to know their audience, because there are going to be a lot of them that are just flat out not going to be receptive. They're stuck in their ways. I mean, literally the mind stops forming new neurological pathways and engaging with creative thinking and problem solving. The older you get more restricted. And especially for people who have been in positions of power and authority and have developed a God complex, you may not be able to reach them at all. But the ones that are genuine, if you have a board that is genuine, you have to feel out if they're going to be receptive to the message at all. And you have to develop a rapport. And if you can't embrace honestly, if you're middle management and you're trying to sell this idea to your company, the only thing that you have to invest in order personally to make this successful is time, is taking your own time and energy and learning about yourself and learning about this leadership style and instilling it, and then going, hey, do you see how my guys are doing like, say if you have a sales team and you actually personally invest in each member in your team and they're operating at maximum potential, you can go, this is how I did it.
It's lead by example and then show the example.
Yes, you can. Right? You absolutely cannot preach what you don't practice. You're not going to get any receptiveness. You're not going to get any respect. It's not going to work. Become the change you want to see in the world.
I love that. That's one of my favorite quotes. Well, listen, Zachery, we have had some great time together this evening, and I would like to hear more from you. So if you're up for it, let's bring you back for a part 2, continue this discussion, and see where it takes us. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the message that you're trying to get out there is it's dire, it's needed.
It's epidemic.
Yeah.
It really is. And thank you for being part of my effort to try to reach people, as you just said, who are willing, who are genuinely ready to try something different, and accept that it starts with me and I need to lead that change, right? So why don't we do this, everybody? We will catch you on the flip side when we come back with Zachery Peterson, part 2. Thanks for your time tonight, Zachery.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.